on this computer?
Yeah, I think it'll be easier to share if you do it on the computer.
Okay.
Okay. It says recording, so we're recording now. Y'all mind your manners.
Okay.
I'll try and do the same.
Yes.
The opening prayer is the last line of that opening prayer kind of caught my attention this morning when I was looking over it again. It says, as we study your word, may we hear our sisters' stories and in hearing relieve some of their burden. I think that's one of the critical messages of lament, is that somehow people are relieved of their burdens when they know that someone else has heard their story. And that's essentially how lament works, is we tell other people our story, and in telling the story, we hear it again. Sometimes we hear it differently when we're telling it to one person as opposed to when we told it to someone else. But it is in the retelling of the story that there is some sense of relief. And this is lesson 3, which is about women's lament, even though ironically the whole book is Presbyterian Women's Bible Study, so it's all really about women's lament. But this particularly lifts up 2 stories in Scripture where women are listed both as lamenters and as leaders in the community. So I just wanted to ask you all if you had thought about, or if you were willing to share any of the roles that women play in 21st century Greeneville's rituals surrounding death. What is it that women are expected to do and do when people die?
Provide food at receptions.
I call those casserole prayers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else?
Visit.
Visit.
Cards. Cards.
Cards. Yep. Okay. Women, specifically defined as lamenters in Scripture, are often presented as mourning their children. And some of them lament their children that have been born, but others lament the children that were never conceived, much less born. And that's a very intense mourning, especially in Scripture, because there is that cultural expectation, especially in a culture that in some ways does not value women. There was a sense in a patriarchal culture when women were essentially, their primary value was to produce children. And if they couldn't do that, there was a great pressure that they felt. And you think about Mary and Elizabeth and Hannah and all of those who were without children, and how painful that was for them. And, you know, we have stories of women who finally had children late in life, but you got to know there were a lot of stories of women who never even got to experience that. So that's a great part of the lament that is listed in Scripture, is mourning of the children. And our text from Jeremiah chapter 9 is about women mourning for the children. I'm going to share that now so we can read through that. Let me see if I can get that to come on up here. Come on, boy. There you go. Okay. So this is women's lament. We're back to the drawing board in some ways, but we're going to go to the Jeremiah 9 text. Excuse me. This is how it reads. Thus says the Lord of hosts, consider and call for the mourning women to come. Send for the skilled women to come. Let them quickly raise a dirge over us, so that our eyes may run down with tears and our eyelids flow with water. For a sound of wailing is heard from Zion. How we are ruined, we are utterly shamed, because we have left the land, because they have cast down our dwellings. Hear, O women, the word of the Lord, and let your ears receive the word of his mouth. Teach to your daughters a dirge, and each to her neighbor a lament. Death has come up into our windows. It has entered our palaces to cut off the children from the streets and the young men from the squares. So Jeremiah recognizes that as long as human life continues on earth, the need for mourners will continue. And in verse 17, he talks about skilled women, that is, professional lamenters and mourners, and identifies that they're already present, that they have been called. Call the mourners, call the skilled women, and tell them to raise a dirge over us. A need that is always present. And then in verse 20, he talks about the valuable community skill of lament and mourning, and how that needs to be handed down from generation to generation. Teach your daughters a dirge, and each to her neighbor a lament. Now I can stop share and come back and ask you, just a second. Put myself on mute so I can cough. Have you ever thought about the ways that you may have participated in teaching the generations that came behind you how to mourn? Any remembrances or experiences of that? Jan.
Just making sure I'm off mute. One of the things when I was growing up and attending a Lutheran elementary school is that we had a lot of familiarity with funerals, and we were in a rural area. My mom was one of 12 children, so I had lots of cousins, and there were a lot of deaths that we as young children were exposed to. I think that's a lot more difficult today, but it was part of, we learned very young that it was part of a cycle of life. So when we had our children, I know that there were certainly parents who felt it inappropriate to involve young children in attending funerals or in participating, but I always felt that that was an important exposure. And as the kids got older, then there was more discussion about what it meant. But it was a way to sort of bring the next generation along in understanding what that whole process and tradition was about.
Okay. I was in a meeting some time ago with a lady who was a hospital chaplain who had grown up in Russia. And she was talking about how the culture there was so very different related to death in the way that children were involved or not involved. And she was saying that it was very shocking to her to come to this country and see how children were sort of protected and kept apart, at least these days, in that process. That they wouldn't go to a visitation, they wouldn't go to a funeral, they would be off, playing with friends or doing something else while the adults did that. And she said that she found that to be a very helpful part of her growing up, was learning about death early on and figuring out, you know, as she was able, as her age and her intellect, her mental capacity was able to learn, as you said, the cycle of life, to learn about death. Others, think about how you have perhaps taught younger folks the process of mourning.
I know when Lisa, my oldest, was like 8 years old, her best friend and our neighbors died. A little girl that had been through, she was finally had meningitis, that I think is what it was that finally she died from. And it was so hard for her to understand, because at that time she didn't go to the funeral. And there was nothing out there. There was no books or anything about a childhood death. And it was very difficult, but it was a process that, you know, we worked through together, that it was hard, you know, because you don't have the support system of the culture to back it up. But it was a great loss. And
I've even heard folks say that, you know, us city dwellers or even town dwellers don't have the experience of even seeing the death of animals very often. You know, unless you count the possum on the side of the road, which doesn't usually elicit a great deal of sympathy. You know, maybe somebody's cat or dog, but you don't experience, like farm life did, the life and death of animals. So I think there's an important part of what we do, whether we take them along or find some way to help them participate, that we're doing exactly what Jeremiah says, that we're teaching them the process of lament and mourning.
That when
Yes,
you said
George.
God, made me think of when Brian was young. The only thing he knew what dead was, you know, like the frogs had been run over in the driveway. You know, that was his concept of what was death. And so John decided that Brian needed to go with us to a funeral for someone that he was not that close to. So he would have, you know, not like a grandparent. So it was an uncle or something, just so he would have a better idea that dead.
How old was he then?
Run over frog, huh?
How old was he then?
Well, let's see, probably about 5 years, I'd say 4 or 5. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to share screen again here and see if I can share with you. Well, let me tell you a little bit about this first before I go into it. You're seeing my screen?
okay, no. Are you seeing mine? Because
Nope.
I'm okay. No problem.
I'm good. I can share. But I want to tell you, I think I may have mentioned this. I can't remember if it was sermon or circle or just conversation, but 2015 was a big year of change for our family. After almost 19 years serving the Fayetteville church, I knew something needed to change, but I didn't know what it was. And I ended up having some pretty serious surgery on vertebrae in my neck that put me out of commission for about 8 weeks. And rather than just sit around for those 8 weeks not knowing what I was going to do, I don't know if it was crazy enough or stupid enough or whatever, I decided to tell the church at Fayetteville that it was time for me to go. And so I left before the surgery, and then I sat at home for 8 weeks trying to figure out what was going to come next. So there was you might call it a midlife crisis there in terms of figuring out where to go. And since writing was one of the things that had always been part of my own self-care, my own self-therapy, if you will, there was a time when I hit a major writer's block and nothing would come out. And that scared me almost more than anything, to have nothing. You know, I didn't use a pen and paper, to have nothing at the end of my fingertips that would come out on the keyboard. And so that's what this lament is about. So are you all seeing? Okay, come on here. No, you're not. All right, hold on a minute here. We're having technical difficulties. Gonna have to go to that and say that's the one. For some reason, my PowerPoint decides it needs to put two of them up. I didn't need that one. Let's try that again.
Amy Williams is trying to get in.
Okay.
So.
I'm going to move down here to this and see if we can get a share going on. So I had to look up I guess that's Latin, I'm not sure, tabula rasa, clean slate.
Yes.
And that is basically what it felt like, but it didn't feel a good kind of clean. It was an empty kind of clean. And so somewhere along during that recovery is when this lament took place. I'll just share it with you very quickly, and then we'll move on to the Matthew text. So it's not every day that you stare at the next chapter of your life and see nothing but blank pages. Midway through the 5th decade, there are supposed to be all sorts of things written down: calendar events, daily schedules, and a whole host of presumptions that could take up every minute and even more if I but acquiesce. Both the silence and the sea of unmarked parchment, that is, the blank screen, just seem to stare back at me like I should know without hesitation what to write as well as how to live it. The frightened little voice of comfortable repetition raises himself to full stature in a tone of deepest authoritarian bass, demands that the previous chapters be plagiarized right now with only minor modifications, just enough difference to avoid a Groundhog Day feeling of doing it all over again. But I refuse, sitting, staring, not knowing what to do, understanding only that copy and paste from the past will not suffice. A voice that speaks without sound makes it clear that the only thing worth filling these pages with will be given not by the elevated decibels of faux bravado, but by the whisper of hope. And not on a schedule of my deducing, but in kairos, the God schedule that is sometimes beyond the nick of time. Seeking a patient faithfulness that will not be intimidated by the heartbeat of urgency, I sit and stare, hoping to find artistic expression, stick figures, muted pastels, or a few phrases and fragments that might one day make some sense. Eventually the day passes and nothing stains the pages or keyboard but the metaphorical tears of my waiting. Tomorrow, I tell myself. Tomorrow? And all I know is to carry on. That was during the time when I finally felt like I needed to be doing something different than going back into another church as the called and installed pastor. And that's when I felt like I was being led to interim pastoring. And that's how I ended up here.
Thank goodness.
But those two interims were sort of a season for me of kind of reevaluating what I had been doing for 20-something years, now 30. But as I think about the process of mourning and how we share that with other folks, I remember a story I read just probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was a very brief story about a family who had young children, and they had an elderly couple that lived next door to them. And the wife of that elderly couple died. And the mother and the father with their children were sitting around talking about what they could do for the man who was left alone. And somehow the young girl decided that she needed to go visit this elderly neighbor of hers. She'd talked to him, I'm sure, times before, but she told her parents she wanted to go see him, and they were a little hesitant, but she insisted. So they took her to see him, and he invited her in, and the dad just kind of stayed out on the porch, didn't go in with him. Invited her in, and about 10 or 15 minutes later, she came back outside, and the man thanked them for coming over, and she and her dad went back home. And on the way back home, her dad said, "What did you do?" And she said, "Oh, I just sat with him and helped him cry." And I say, out of the mouths of babes come the true gifts of sharing lament. The second scripture that our lesson for today is from the Gospel of Matthew. It's about Herod the Great, as he was called. And the writer tells us that he was a Roman puppet king who was so afraid of losing his power that he killed anyone by whom he felt threatened. He even killed 3 of his own 14 children that were birthed by 7 of his 9 wives. That's some horrible math. Killing 3 of your own 14 children who were birthed by 7 of your 9 wives. That particular text comes up in the lectionary. I don't know if it's every year or if it's every 3 years, but it is always on the Sunday after Christmas. And in 30 plus years of pastoral ministry, I may have preached on the Sunday after Christmas once, because that's always that one last week to get in that last week of vacation you need to use up before the year's over. So one year, about 12 or 13 years ago, I had planned one last week of vacation immediately after Christmas. And the challenge of that for pastors is that that's when everybody wants to get away. So it's hard to find someone to fill in this pulpit supply on that Sunday. And one of our church elders agreed to preach that Sunday, which they didn't do that often. He agreed to preach, and so he had sent me an email and said, well, what are the lectionary texts for this upcoming Sunday? And I sent them to him, and this Matthew passage was one of those. And about 5 minutes after I sent him the email, my phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and he said, "You don't really expect me to preach on this passage, do you?" And I said, "Well, tell you the truth, I've never really preached on it, so no, feel free to preach on something else. Pick an entirely different passage if you want to." He said, "Well, I just would have no idea what to say about that passage." And I said, "Well, I understand, because this passage is often called either the holy innocents or the murder of the holy innocents for good reason. Because our post-Christmas worship in the church mostly focuses on the escape of the Holy Family to Egypt. And this text reminds us that there is an entirely different story, which is the harsh reality of all of those who did not escape to Egypt. So let's take a look at that text. Every time it goes back to the beginning. Let's see here. We can go to here and here. Well, that's not where I said, but all right, here we are. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. The story of the Magi is one of the very interesting parts of Matthew's gospel, because here are these outsiders who come from a land that we don't even know about, and they're following this star because they've been following it for a long time. And they go to Herod assuming he would know something about it, and he knows nothing and sends them off. And if they knew anything about Herod, they would know he was setting them up. But you remember, they are warned in a dream not to go back to him because he was pretending that he would come and worship this king, but we all know what he wanted to do. He wanted to get rid of it like he did his own children. So when he found out he couldn't get rid of, he didn't know where the baby was. He didn't know that the Holy Family had escaped to Egypt. He decided that the best way to do it was to just kill them all. And so he went in and killed all of the babies who were 2 years old or younger, just to make sure that he got the job done. And of course, he didn't, but he did bring a massive blanket of grief over the whole area of Bethlehem. I want to share with you one more thing, and then I'd like to hear if there are anything else you would like to add, because as I was thinking about the lament, I was thinking about something that happened about 7 years ago, so a couple of years before I left the Fayetteville church. There was a young lady there whose parents and grandparents were very involved in the church, and she had been, from the time she was born, involved in the children's choir and youth group and all of the activities. And at this time in 2013, she was off at college for probably her second year of college, I think. And she had a boyfriend who was also from Fayetteville. And at some point during their relationship, he decided to take his own life. And it was very devastating for her. And I remember she was in Knoxville and I was in Fayetteville, so I couldn't actually see her. But I remember thinking about her and writing a prayer for her and sending it to her. And the prayer was called Tears. And this is how it goes. Tears are the ocean upon which life sails, waves lapping steadily against the shore of our stories. Each wave brings in the broken pieces of former journeys, some as jagged behemoths, others as tiny chunks worn smooth. It is your own beach, yet not even you know the tide's syncopated struggle. Stay put, and be washed each day, letting the moon's pull have its way. The vessel of your relationships anchors just beyond the first sandbar. And I was picturing this boat out there in the water. The day will come when you will find the courage to swim with fragments in your hand out to the waiting ship. The you who climbs aboard is not the you who last sailed. Neither are you alone. Collective wisdom and comfort from previous journeys guide and hold you now. This, the tears path, safely carrying both you and your fractured history into a hope-filled present. She never responded to that, but her father told me about 5 years later that she spoke of it often. She's married now, and I know that she's carrying that grief with her, just like all of us carry our own grief. So I want to invite you, as you think about the story of women's lament in Scripture, especially that piece of artwork that's on page 28, the very first page before the lesson starts. I want you to look at that picture. Does everybody have the book with them? I do have the picture I can put up. Okay. Susan, you got yours there? Okay. All right. If you want to just look at that picture, because to me that is a very good artistic rendering of what lament might look like. I'm going to shut up for a minute and let you all just kind of examine that picture and possibly write down a couple of words that come to mind as you look at that lament. So I'm going to put my timer on here for a minute or so, okay? Okay, did any of you write anything down that you would be willing to share? You don't have to.
Well, I thought about loneliness, thinking, even peaceful. Peaceful and beauty. I thought of beauty.
Honestly, this is Cynthia. I don't think if I had not known the context of that picture that I would have realized that was a woman. And so it occurred to me that she's sort of part of the background, but such an essential part that you don't even know she's there.
It kind of blends in.
Mm-hmm.
Listening.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was curious about the object in the lower, I guess, right-hand part. I thought, is that a significant amount of time that is it a clock that just kind of, I don't know. I thought about time maybe as how much time we don't spend enough time lamenting. And what do you think it is?
I don't know. On the top of it, there's almost something that looks like a cross. I'll be honest with you. I didn't notice it until you just called it out, because I was so busy looking at her and the plant that was hanging over her. But in some ways, it looks like a church, but then it could be a box of some sort.
Yeah.
That would hold.
Well, on page 35, it sort of tells us about the picture on that first column on page 35. And I don't know what this is. It says the PYXIS. It's in the book. And I'm thinking, okay, do I embarrass myself and say, I don't know what this is and everybody else does? So, but that doesn't bother me anymore. So it says the PYXIS has a lid. It says, and the iris is also called a sword lily. What could the size of the flower and the suggestion of a sword have to do with lament? And I don't know how to pronounce that word, PYXIS.
Okay, that is, have my handy phone here. That is a automated medication dispensing cabinet.
Really? It says, how are laments things we can put away and close up? Is it possible to contain our feelings of lament? And I'm very guilty of that. I am guilty of keeping my feelings to myself a lot. Because I don't know. I think sometimes, I don't know whether it's just me, but I think lots of times we don't want to burden other people with our, problems or our laments. So we just keep them closed up in that PYXIS or whatever it is.
In your little box.
In our little box.
And that doesn't always work out very well.
No, but sometimes it does.
Barbie?
Sometimes people don't want to hear your laments because they don't know what to say about them. And they feel like they have to fix things for you, and it embarrasses them to have to listen. Although we shouldn't be that way.
And then back in that first lesson, it says what lament is not. Lament is not whining and being a Debbie Downer. And lots of times I think when you hear people, it's hard to differentiate. Well, are they just whining about something, or are they truly, lamenting?
Being a good listener is hard for a lot of people.
Right, exactly.
But one reason women get along well with each other and have to have each other is that we solve problems with conversation with each other.
Maybe that's what Jeremiah was talking about. Women just have a way of doing things like that.
What do you see in that plant behind her, that iris? Is it comforting to you? To me, it's almost sinister, like there's a face in there, those eyes, and something coming after you. Does that Iris make you feel good or bad?
It is kind of hanging over.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell whether it is threatening or providing some sort of shade.
Uh-huh.
I think one of the hardest things in listening to someone else's lament is, as Dot said, being a good listener means using your ears and not your mouth. Is that what we often look for is an opportunity, well, I'd say we look for it, but it just comes up and we just jump at it, is an opportunity to turn what's going on in their life to, oh yeah, let me tell you about what happened to me. And whether that is a process of one-upsmanship or not, it's usually not very helpful in dealing with the lament. That's one thing in 30 years, I've learned to quit trying to make my story sound like somebody else's story and just listen.
Yeah, listening is the best counseling technique there is. And I think repeating back what you hear someone say validates what they said and that you heard them. And that's always a good way to acknowledge, rather than, like you say, tell them a story that counteracts what they said. You say, just kind of be in their moment. I know a friend who lost her son, he drowned. And one day, she was talking, finally opened up and talked about it a little bit. And I started saying things like, well, everybody really loved him and thought a lot of him. And she said, I just want to talk about it. And I shut up, because that was the first time she had really opened up. And I was trying to think, well, I need to validate, make her feel better. But she just wanted to talk. And I thought that was interesting.
Well, sometimes it is the things that we do with our hands that allow our mouths to be quiet for a while. That's why I think things like knitting and crocheting and making things with your hands can be cathartic in a way. We used to have a group of women that was, they decided that what they wanted to do was get together every month, one day a month, and they would knit prayer shawls. And so what they would do was they would take the prayer list for the church, and as they were all knitting together, they would name somebody on the prayer list, and if anybody knew anything about what was going on with that person, they would share it, and the rest of the people would just listen as they were knitting. And then they took those prayer shawls after they were made, and we had during one of our morning worship services, we brought all the prayer shawls that had been made forward and put them on the communion table and offered a prayer of thanksgiving for the labor and love that had gone into making them, and a prayer that they would go out and offer comfort to those who were hurting. And so we had a big box of prayer shawls, and whenever anybody had tragedy or grief or loss in their life, one of the women or I or both would take one of the prayer shawls to them and tell them a little bit about the story and say, this is our prayer shawl and we want you to have it. It's made by the women of our congregation. So sometimes finding something to keep you occupied is a way to kind of work through that, especially if you don't want to talk about it. Anybody else? All right.
All right. Thank you, Todd. Okay. So looking at the agenda, Jan, do you have time? Do you need to go ahead and tell yours now? I know you have.
I would appreciate that, Loretta.
Okay. We're going to move down. She's going to talk about the living waters because she has to leave.
Yes, I'm doing, my grandkids are virtual learners. So I'm here with the 4 of them, and right now they're on break. And so I'm able to join in. What I wanted to share with you a little bit, I know that most of you have heard about Living Waters for the World because of Todd's involvement, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the program and about what we're doing right at First Pres. First of all, our committee, and we do have a committee, Andy Worley and I co-chair that committee, and we've been but we've been inactive during this COVID timeframe, but we operate under the Spiritual Outreach Committee. So we are a component of what that group is focusing on. The thing that we remind ourselves about is that there are over, this number is just hard for me to grasp, over 600 million people around the world that don't have access to clean water. The children, especially, nearly half of the deaths of all of the children under the age of 5 are caused by preventable water-related diseases. 2 million children die every year from those preventable water-related diseases. So, we've been praying for Hannah's little boy, Thorsten, and he's got some digestive issues. Well, in many countries, lots of kids have digestive issues and problems with E. coli. His is different. Theirs is because the water that they're brought to drink is not safe. There's kind of a mantra that we use when we talk about the program. It's go, give, and pray. And so as I'm spending just a couple minutes talking about it, I want you to think about how it might work in your life. In that last part, that prayer part, that's a really big deal. And that's something that everyone can do, no matter their level of involvement. Living Waters for the World has been organized since 1993, and it works to train and equip volunteers who form mission teams that work together in partnership with local, international individuals. Who makes up a team? A team can be from an individual church. It can be a couple of churches working together. It can be a corporation. There isn't any one particular formula for what makes up a team. Living Water does not drill wells. That's not part of this program. What they do is they look for existing drinking water that's being used in villages and communities, and it's primarily surface water, and sometimes it can be groundwater. But the water that's available to these communities is contaminated. So, how do we go about working with these communities? The first part is training volunteers. And you've heard about Clean Water U. That's Pastor Todd's been involved in that. And in fact, COVID has put quite an obstacle in the path of how do you train people when you can't get people together and people can't travel. So this year, the training was done virtually. The class was full, and there are people that are equipped to have new teams to go out as these mission team leaders. The Clean Water University there's 3 major components. One is project management, one is health and spiritual education, and one is the actual water testing. And I'll go back to that health and spiritual education a little bit. I've got, I don't know if you can see this little diagram here. That's actually what the water purification system looks like. The cool thing to me is that it can be built on 2 pieces of plywood. It's usually in a building. We're not talking about a huge water maintenance system that you might see in one of our towns. This is something that is very easy for trained people to put together. Now, when I say trained people, one of the attractions of this program for me is the power of the network. This is not a mission program where we sit back or someone sits back and says, we need to go here, we need to go there. There has to be a need in the community. There have to be identified community leaders, because this is a project that will be run by those community leaders. The whole process of initially meeting with individuals in the village, coming back, setting up first analyzing and evaluating what's there, coming back, setting up the project, training people in education and health, and then coming back to make sure that if they're having any issues to help troubleshoot, that's to make that system and that whole operation and project sustainable in that community. One of the interesting things that's happened with COVID is that because such a major component of this program is education, helping people in the village understand just from a hygiene aspect, the importance of hand washing, the importance of clean containers. All of that has been so transferable during this time of COVID that in the communities where this education was already in place, they didn't miss a step. They were able to help people in their community understand the importance of not spreading the virus through the same practices that they had learned for working with water. I'm looking at my notes here. The water teams that go are responsible for their own expenses. We were at the point of identifying people within our church who were interested in forming a water team, going through the training, being part of a team to go to a country where the community need had already been identified. And then COVID came along. The cost is considerable because it involves the flight, the travel is a major cost. The travel to the education, as well as the travel a couple of times back and forth to those communities. So we were all on the verge of working with spiritual outreach to have fundraisers. That's all on hold right now, but you'll be hearing about that again in the future. But one of the things that I want to mention, you may or may not have read every bell has an article written by Dean Gray about living waters for the world. Now, these articles are focused on the program, the big program, and what's happening internationally and what's happening with the training. And also, on every time you see this, there's a link on here to a prayer cast that takes place every Wednesday where there are very specific prayer needs that are addressed. There's also information on how you can support Living Waters for the World financially. And there's several opportunities. One is a one-time donation. One is the Cup Bearer program, which is $5 a month, which provides water for a family for a year. So people can join up and do that. There's also, and I don't know how many of you order from Amazon?
Yeah.
So in Amazon, there's an opportunity where a portion of the cost of your order can go to a charitable donation. And Living Waters for the World is one of those. So if you go to the Living Waters website and you look at donations, even if you are not interested in being a cupbearer or doing a once or several time donation, you can do the Amazon Smile, so that whenever you make your Amazon purchases, then you have the opportunity to direct, and sometimes it's only a few cents that goes back to Living Waters. But if you can imagine all of the Amazon ordering that we've all been doing during this time of COVID, a couple cents for each order really does add up a lot and help support this program during a time where a lot of church communities are sort of on a timeout. So the main focus again of the program is to train teams so that we can work together with international communities in a sustainable way to help them deliver safe drinking water to their communities in a sustainable fashion, so that when it's all said and done and the connections are there, then the teams back off and can go to another place. The mantra, go, give, and pray. So as you think to your own interest, some of you might be interested eventually in being a member of a team. Some of you might support the program through financial giving, either to the big organization of Living Waters or eventually through our own local team. But we can all pray. We can pray for the people that are trainers, like Pastor Todd is. We can pray for the people who are willing to go to countries multiple times to work with local peoples and help them with education and training. And we can pray that all of God's people will have the safe drinking water that we enjoy here. Any questions?
Thank you. That helped clarify a whole lot of questions I think we've had. Very good. Thank you, Jan.
Well, you'll be hearing more about that when we get back to being active. And we have one of the most terrific resources in Pastor Todd in the program.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, let's see. Dot, can you give us our PW report?
I'm turning off this telephone that's ringing. Okay, the treasurer's report. I haven't sent September's out, but I can do that. Our checking account, we started out with $9,302, and we received $334, which was some birthday offering and pledges. And we dispersed $992, and $825 of that went to Sissy for community involvement. So we've got a balance of $8,444.46 in checking. And then in the savings account, we deposited $98, and part of that was for Ruth's Blessings, and some of that was memorials. So we have a balance there of $8,571. And for pledges, we now have 94.2% of our budget pledged for the year. So I think we're doing okay on that. The team, Presbyterian Women's coordinating team did meet on October the 6th. So let me give you a few of the notes of what happened during that meeting. We realized with the woodcutters, we do 4 meals a year starting in January, and we're not sure what's going to happen there. I talked to David Andrew, and they had started up the Saturday before, and they had 25 volunteers. They're not able to use the inmates from the jail right now, and so that was a big part of who we fed. And he said that Saturday that they bought pizza for them because none of the churches were open or were being able to feed them right now. He doesn't have anybody on the calendar. And so we're not sure what will happen with us in January and February, and well, March and April either. But we made the decision to send $250 to the woodcutters, and that would sort of substitute for our January and February meal. And then we'll revisit that and see what we need to do for the other 2 meals that we provide for them. So keep you posted on that. We talked about the coordinating team for 2021. And if you'd like to serve in any capacity or continue serving in whatever you're doing in a position, let Jama or Leanne or myself know about that. We set the 2021 budget. It is $150 less than last year's. The total is $5,380. We talked about a Christmas family, and we will do that again. Jama, I was hoping she would be here, but she's not. But she's reaching out to the city resource and the county resource that we're doing Ruth's Blessings with right now. She's reached out to both of those ladies, and one of them has already said she has a family that would fit what our needs are to have a Christmas family. And we haven't heard from the second one, but we will be doing that again this year. Okay. I think it's further on down, but I'll go ahead and talk about this too. The birthday thank offering fundraiser that's going on, it's doing good. I've gotten $315 to date. Part of that's just straight donation. Part is because people have baked things and picked up. This morning I got a call from my friend Joe Wagner that he wants 2 loaves of pumpkin bread. So, I had let him know we were doing this because he always buys that at the breakfast. So it'll be in the Vail again in November and December. So just keep calling and placing orders, and we're getting good donations. So is there any questions about any of this?
So we're supposed to contact the person about
Yes.
what we want.
The name and what they're providing, and the telephone number or email address is in the bell. And we've had one added to that since then, and that'll be repeated in November. But yeah, just call the person and say, I want 2 dozen cookies or bread or whatever they're doing, and work out a time and pick it up or meet somewhere or whatever, and then give us a donation. So yeah.
Send the donation to you. Take it
Yes.
to the church and give it to you. Okay.
Make it to Presbyterian women, right?
And thank offering. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you. And then Ruth's Blessings, I think you talked about that too.
Okay, Ruth's Blessings. Well, this is the month that we'll be serving Plaza Towers, so that goes the 26th, and the other two, one's probably picking up this week, and one picked up the first week of the month. So we're still using the same format of providing for the resource centers of the city and county school, and taking things to Plaza Towers every 3 months. So yeah,
Okay.
still working.
Well, I talked to Sissy and Caring for Others. Let's see, they had a starting balance of $786.34. We paid out for 5 families, $176.68. And so the water and electric balance is $609.66. Okay, Barbie, how much?
Okay, we have Christmas fund is $77.50. Least going, we have $175.89. And sunshine, we have $144.77.
Okay, that's pretty good, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, if you want to make those donations, it's better to take cash if you can and leave it at the church.
Sure.
I'm going to, the shut-ins, I know the ones I've been adopted, I guess I would say, they've been so responsive and so happy to have you contact them. And I appreciate everybody. I mean, it didn't take but one day to get that everybody has somebody that they are contacting and seeing. If you don't want to do that anymore and want to give, if you think, well, I've done this 2 or 3 months, I'd rather somebody else do it, let me know and we'll put their name back out there for somebody else to contact maybe. But anybody have any comments about the people you've contacted or any information? I know I've talked to Judy Neese and she's doing fine. She's just staying in and hasn't been out, and but she's doing right, and said if and when church opens up again, she hopes she'll come back. And I see the Averys, and they're just they're doing fine. Just Helen says, well, this isn't a whole lot different for me because she's in all the time anyway, pretty much with Dion. But anybody else want to share that anybody they visited with?
Yeah.
Okay, Joy.
Well, she's not my person, but I just talked to Dora today, and she's leaving where she was and going to Morning Point today. She was signing out, and her brother Hadley was getting her over there to Morning Point. So that'll be a thing for her.
Oh, I know it. She's had a
It'll
long.
be nice. Will be nice if we could start visiting at Morning Point, but you know.
I know.
Um,
Okay, anybody else? Anything there? Okay. Food bank needs this month is oatmeal and dry cereal. And we've talked about the thank offering. Wednesday night small group information. Or anybody have any? We started my little group, Amy and I, last Wednesday. And I think you can still join in, I'm sure, can't you, Todd?
Oh yeah, you can go to the website and sign up, or you can call the office and have Greg sign you up if you haven't signed up for one of the small group meetings.
Okay. Well, anybody else have any comments or suggestions or anything? I know prayer requests. I have Dora and Nancy Parvin. I'm sure all the people on our shut-in list. Ahana, how, and her Thorson, did he come home?
He did, but there's still a lot of things that are unanswered yet about what's causing his problem, and they're running more tests to try and figure that out.
Yeah, that's so sad. 3 things, I think. Mono and some couple of infections. So put Thorson on your prayer list, Choice.
I think it might be nice if the women would put like a little short article in the Bell about some of the things like giving to the resource centers. So, you know, I know we make a big list at the end of the year of all these things we've done, but I think like a short paragraph. I ran into Amy when she was picking up things yesterday or day before, and she was so complimentary of how the church women have helped with those projects, and of course we've helped the county too. But I don't think most people in the church don't know that things like that are going on. I think it'd be nice to just, even if it's just a paragraph, people read things that are short, to say, here's the things that the women have done or are doing, you know. Since we can't have Ruth's blessings, which was known, let's share some other things that might not be known that are going on.
Yeah, that might be that's a good suggestion, because, you know, people are saying, well, what are they doing with Ruth's blessings since we're not handing out the bags? But yeah, that might be a good thing to put in the Bell. Thank you. What about anybody else? Any comments or suggestions? We will meet again by Zoom on November 18th. And and we'll have it. If nothing else, I'll read the closing prayer and then we'll do our benediction. So the closing prayer is, God of Sarah and Miriam and of Hagar and Tamar, God of my sister beside me and my God, your daughters are here. We are ready to lead your people in mourning when it is time to mourn, and dancing when it is time to dance. Amen. So let's do our benediction. Go in peace, God the
God
Father,
the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
preserve and keep you this day
and
and forevermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you all for coming, and I hope, did all of y'all get the first invitation? I know Jamie didn't get it. Well, there's Cynthia. I had to resend it to several people, and I'm not sure exactly what is going on, but hopefully we'll work out the glitches.
We didn't mention the lament that he wrote for the women from Agape Circle, but it's wonderful.
It is.
I forgot to tell you that I have an acquaintance of mine, not really a friend, that I serve on the Presbyterian Writers Guild with, who is the editor of Presbyterian Outlook, one of the Presbyterian magazines. And I sent that to her last week after I sent it to you all. And I think they're going to publish it in their magazine in the upcoming months. So I'll let you know if I see that.
Did everybody get
And I sent it to Horizon also, because they have, their quarterly book that we get from Horizon. That might be a good thing too.
Did everybody get this? You want to read it? I know you kind of composed it from some of the things that people sent in, some of the ladies sent in to you. Is that right? Or
oh yeah, it was mostly your words.
Okay. So did everybody get that, or shall we read it?
I think I sent it out to everybody.
Oh, okay, you did too. Okay, and I did too. So we've gotten that. So you might want to read over it and think about it. Okay, any other comments or thoughts? All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next month.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.